And joining me now is Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. And just a few days ago, he came out in support of impeachment proceedings. Congressman, thank you for joining us. Well, let me start on that question, first of all, to nail down what exactly it is that you're calling for here. You use, I see in your statement, the term impeachment inquiry. We're hearing that a lot now, that word inquiry attached to impeachment. Is there a distinction you're trying to draw between just saying impeachment and saying impeachment inquiry, or is that a distinction without a difference?
Well, I think to the public there may not be a distinction, but the distinction that we see is the Watergate hearings began on an inquiry, and I think they do two things for us. I think they bolster our legal arguments in front of the courts to obtain unredacted reports, get subpoenas answered, and force people to testify. I also think the hearings that will come with the impeachment inquiry will help educate and inform the American public. One of the things that struck me last week was the power of the special counsel's message. When Mr. Mueller said what he said, he was just reading from his own report. But it's clear that a large amount of the American public took Mr. Barr to his word that the report exonerated him. So I think the inquiry serves two purposes. It helps us with our oversight function, and it educates the American public, and I think moves them where we should be going, to a full-scale investigation of the president.
But is there any scenario? So you're talking about Judiciary Committee hearings here. You're saying you think it moves the public. We can talk about public opinion in a minute. But if it doesn't move the public, if we end up in terms of public opinion exactly where we are, is there a scenario where you hold these hearings, you have an impeachment inquiry, and you end up saying, OK, never mind, we're not going to impeach? Or is it a runaway train once it gets going?
It's hard to tell. I think that it's hard to underestimate just how important the other part of this is. The fact is the president has given us no choice. I believe the special counsel laid out solid evidence that there was obstruction before the report was filed. For me, the last straw was the obstruction continuing after the fact. So it makes our oversight function nearly impossible. So part of this is getting the American public to the point where they understand its validity. And again, simply arguing in court and having press hits where we talk about this isn't nearly as valuable. I remember watching the Watergate hearings when I was in high school. And in April of that year, the American public was not in favor of the president resigning. Just 4 months later, he was gone. Clearly, they had some value, some purpose in educating the public in 1974.
Let me put it to you this way, because I saw an interview with you with Rachel Maddow here at MSNBC the other day. You said you are already satisfied in your view that the president obstructed justice, that the president abused his power, and you said as well you're satisfied that he conspired with the Russians. So I guess what I'm asking is, if you open an impeachment inquiry and you hold these hearings and you already hold these conclusions, how could that not lead to an impeachment vote? What could possibly be produced by that process that would make you say, never mind?
Oh, I don't think my mind is going to change. I think what I'm trying to help the public appreciate is we've got to count noses in the Senate. And at least part of this growth has to be organic from the ground up, driving pressure from the American public. And that's the hope that I will see in going forward with these hearings and getting additional documents made for it. All we have is a redacted report and unanswered subpoenas, and the president refusing to have people testify. Again, obstruction after the fact. So I think all these measures drive forth helping the American public fully understand what has taken place and what is at stake. So I think that distinction does matter. I do recognize that I don't have a vote in the Senate, and I need the American public to help drive them.
Well, OK, so speaking of the American public, here's what we've got. We can put up that poll we alluded to. This is a new CNN poll out in the last day. Right now, overall, 41% of Americans say they support impeachment. That is 76% among Democrats. That's an increase, I think, 8 points in a few months among Democrats. That's helping to drive that overall increase. But overall, it's still 54% opposition to this. You've seen Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, clearly trying to hit the brakes in a lot of this impeachment talk in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. Do you think to get Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, on board with an impeachment inquiry, you need to get a majority support in these polls to show the country's behind it going in?
I think this is the most important decision that Speaker Pelosi will make in this term. She's listening carefully to the American people and to her caucus, and obviously she can count noses in the Senate. But my main point I have to stress is I do believe an inquiry will bolster our argument to get additional documentation that the President of the United States obstructed and continues to obstruct justice. And that is the way to move forward. That's the way to move the needle. We saw it happen with Mr. Mueller. I think that strength only grows when more information gets out.
All right, Congressman Mike Quigley from Illinois, thank you for taking a few minutes.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.